Hi, David.
Hello there. Good morning or afternoon, based on where you are.
It is afternoon for me, very definitely. Pleased to say. Sorry. Okay. So better. And where are you?
I'm located in Colorado.
Jolly good. How's it in Colorado?
Uh, Starting to get cooler.
Okay, we've got dull, slightly wet weather, what with it being England here. So it's kind of what we expect.
Yeah, probably another month before it starts getting rainy, and then another month after that before it starts snowing.
Yeah, yeah. And remind me who you're with if I knew. I can't remember, I'm afraid.
I'm with Intel.
Oh, jolly good. Excellent.
Yeah, that's my name.
Oh, cup of tea. There's one stereotype I'm very happy to live up to. Enjoying a nice cup of tea.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody.
All of those things.
Hey,
Yaran, I see you made it. Happy to
I
see you.
made it. I made it eventually. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I'm
I'm
very much
obviously a
looking.
guest here, so please, yeah, let me know where I should go on
Yeah,
stage.
yeah. Yeah. I'm going to wait another minute or two for maybe a few more folks to show up. Um, but I'm very much looking forward to the topic, and I'm going to try resist to ask too many questions.
Have we got a someone doing a presentation today?
We do. Yaran's going to present on, I don't know if I pronounced it right, but whimsy.
Oh, that's right. Good. Excellent. Interesting. Looking forward to that.
Hopefully. Just let me know how much time I have for the whole thing.
Yeah, I think there's one other topic. I think a plug that Dan has I think put on the list. I suspect you have the bulk of the hour.
Okay, good. I'm not
So
going to
any
need it.
all right. Wait till you hear the questions. We'll see.
Yeah, that's exactly what
All
I was
right.
going to say. Sometimes there are a lot of questions. Not always, but sometimes. So,
Yeah, true. I think we're good to go here. So there's two topics on today's agenda, and I see Dan sneakily, or Dan and or Mike sneakily snuck themselves into the queue in front of Whimsy.
it
So it's
was
a quick plug
Dan.
for yeah. quick plug for 24 and 17 on the issues list, which I think also is related to Whimsy or workload identity. So whoever wants to chat about that, feel free.
Yeah, so kind of convenient timing with the Whimsy presentation, but Mike showed up to the last TAC meeting with a bucket of terms that kind of popped up as underdefined in some broader work that he's been doing, and among them was workload. And I recalled that we had this issue number 17 that came up a while ago. And then in issue 24, what we were trying to do was get like a concrete set of deliverables from the SIG so that like at the end of the year, we can all go to our respective management and be able to say, yeah, this was valuable time here, not just from good exchange of information, but we actually had some work products that we can point to that have helped advance the sector. So I wanted to suggest that one of these outputs could be an actual definition of workload and see whether or not people were on board with kind of doubling down on number 17 there to get that definition worked out.
In fact, there is the Whimsy group in ITF, workload identity for multi-system environments. Ideally, we would align with their definition, or otherwise we need a translation layer to explain how the two relate to each other.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing the Whimsy definition, whether it's sufficient for the things that we need to be explicit about. So we'll see.
Well, they do mention like remote attestation in their documents. In fact, that's sort of at my suggestion, I think. So there's certainly an intent on their behalf. So as I'm saying, like it's probably best to coordinate, and they have a mailing list. It's like sort of easy to engage.
Well, yeah, let's find out.
Okay,
I'm neutral.
I can. I mean, if somebody else signs up, I can initiate that conversation.
Well, we've got a thing on Whimsy coming up anyway, so let's see. And I think from my point of view, the key question is going to be whether we can discuss the different layers and separate them out, because they are important.
Correct.
As part of the attestation. Anyway.
So maybe after my presentation will mostly be about the technical aspects, but let's have a discussion both about technical aspects and about process aspects. So how can we collaborate? How can your forum and the Whimsy working group work together?
Was good.
I was going to ask if you can briefly, like in 3 sentences or less, describe what do you mean by the layers, Mike? The technical layers?
Yeah, so we generally wouldn't include things like firmware and firmware and microcode. So we generally talk about stuff within the TE, but that can mean a variety of things. It might include a UEFI or a BIOS. It might include an OS. It might include a hypervisor inside there, or it might just be the application that's being executed. And it partly depends on the execution model you have. You're using something like NARCs, or are you using something like Grameen, or using certification.
Right, so you're imagining, I think the layering in the TCP, in the entire TCP, or perhaps chopping the legs out of the TCP and skipping the firmware or something like that. But I think that's what I'm hearing.
Well, I think we need to define what the TCP is as part of the fun there. But yes. So the stuff inside the isolation layer could be considered a workload, and then you need to decide. You need to be able to at least define what you mean by those different things, so that people who don't want to include them can say workload minus or workload plus. I think that's the sort of discussion we should be having.
My understanding was actually maybe a little different, or maybe just I would word it differently. There's a single T, like as an enclave on SGX, or it could be a virtual machine talking to a GPU. That would be sort of a workload, but it consists of like two different microchips doing different things. Or it could be an entire application spanning devices, which is also part of workload, especially when presented externally. So, even that is subject to discussion.
Agreed. That absolutely. So there's the question of spanning workloads. What does that look like? So do we mean T workload, or do we mean a confidential computing workload? And they may be slightly different. So yes, these are the reasons we need to have this discussion. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Dan, did you get a chance?
I think that's a good. Yeah, I think that's probably a good setup for Yaron to go ahead and answer all these questions for us, and we'll be able to tie a bow on it and be done.
5-minute discussion sounds like. Shouldn't take long.
All right, Yaron, you're up. Thank you.
So, can you all
we can see, yeah.
The first slide, full screen, great. Okay, so I'm Yaron Sheffer, I'm from Intuit. Whatever I say here, or actually at the IETF, is mostly unrelated to what I'm doing at Intuit. Whimsy is a working group within the IETF. Some people here have been at the IETF for years and years. Some people may not be aware of the IETF processes. Feel free to ask me and us anything so you understand what the IETF is, how the process works, the standardization process works as it applies to workload identity, and how you all could participate/collaborate with Whimsy. So Whimsy is a recently established working group. And each working group at the IETF starts with a charter. This is like the first paragraph of the charter, and I will eventually share the slides with you, and there's a link to the charter. And it's all about fine-grained, least privilege access control for workloads. So ensuring that we have an interoperable authentication and authorization framework for running workload in normally complex environments. So multi-service, multi-cloud, obviously multi-vendor environments. The charter then goes into goals. And I'm not going to read all of this, but the goals is about standardizing solutions and documenting existing practices. So the bulk of the work is about creating new standards, but wherever existing solutions exist that we can use, or wherever simply the industry is used to doing something and it's reasonably okay, our goal is to document it to achieve better interoperability and better security for deployed solutions. The Whimsy working group will be collaborating, of course, internally to IETF. Many of the people on the Whimsy working group are coming out of the identity community, so that's Auth and SCIM, and of course, RATS, which is the confidential computing or attested, whatever working group is very much involved. CNCF, and specifically the SPIFFY work in the CNCF, are partners, and IETF in general is a very open organization, and so people can contribute, or the bar for contribution or the barriers for contribution are very low. Everybody can participate, everybody can see the mailing lists, everybody can go on the mailing list and contribute with very minimal like legal or IPR requirements. The goal of WIMSE, in addition to standardizing solutions and documenting practices, is to be a standing venue for more generally for workload identity. So not necessarily, so for example, if we are now focused on REST APIs, and there's very interesting work going on for other types, other network protocols, that could be an interesting discussion in the working group. Maybe not as an immediate standardization work item, and maybe in the future it could evolve into such a work item. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, so a quick question. I'm sorry if I missed it and you said it. What does WIMSE stand for? What's it short for? If assuming it is, kind of.
Oh gosh. I guess it's workload identity for multi-service environments.
For multi-system environments.
Workload identity.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry to have missed it. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
But it's basically a nice name for workload identity. And by the way, I co-led the BOF, Birds of a Feather, a group that led to the creation of the working group. I'm now a member of the working group, and such a thing doesn't really exist. Anybody in membership is completely open, and I'm not a co-chair. The deliverables or the current deliverables are also listed in the charter. There's a document on WIMSE architecture. This is where we define, for example, what a workload is. There's a document on service-to-service protocol. This is my personal focus right now. There's a planned document on token issuance with limited authority. I will not go into that primarily because it's not yet happening. And then there's a document on token exchange that's still in very early stages, so we don't even have an adopted document now. And then lastly, on the best practices side, we have a document on token distribution. So out of the 5 bullets you see here, the first 2 and the last one are currently adopted documents, but all of them are in very, very early stages. And it's going to be realistically a year and a half or maybe 2 years before we see actual standards coming out of this group. Best practices may be quicker, they're usually earlier, but actual standards take some time to stabilize. Yes, Mike? Or do you still have your hand up?
I failed to lower my hand. Sorry, there we go.
I was about to raise my hand, so can I take Mike's place?
Yes, please. Unless it's about what are workloads.
No. So those 5 topics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are in scope now. Do you have a sense of whether the scope is anticipated to grow to additional bullet items, or whether this is kind of fixed and locked down?
It's never fixed. I gave one hint. We are focused on REST APIs right now, just to keep the scope within reason.
Mm-hmm.
And we as a working group are expected to have some good progress on these things, and then we can approach our area director and ask for a change of scope. And if the group is making progress, that will normally happen. So we need to have enough of a constituency interested in a particular issue and have good progress on our main charter, and then we can get rechartered. That's the process.
Are you going to talk at all about the Whimsy architecture doc? If so, I'll pause my next question. If not, I'll ask it now.
I will. The next slide is actually taken verbatim from the architecture draft. And we define in that document what a workload is. It's a very sort of generic definition, a running instance of software executing for a specific purpose. You can basically read anything into it. It may be short-lived or long-lived. And it's also important to note that the granularity is not set in stone. So specifically, you might have workloads within workloads. So you might decide that you treat your server as a workload, and then you treat several daemons that run on it as workloads in their own right. Again, this is version 00 or 001 of the architecture draft. It's very early. If you don't like this definition, you can go on the mailing list and say so and propose a different definition or a tweak to this definition. And then this is taken from the service-to-service protocol, but it's really still at the architecture layer. So the model is, so specifically for the service-to-service protocol, we are talking about one single hop of workload A making a call or sending a message to workload B. And both workloads communicate to an identity server. There may be multiple, but just for simplicity, let's talk about one identity server. They get some concrete credential from the identity server, then they use those credentials to protect the traffic between them. And then specifically the callee workload B, is also responsible for authorization. So there may be a policy enforcement point and an optional policy decision point where workload B can decide whether it accepts the call from workload A. The notion of how to protect, so the one thing where we have consensus on is that we don't want bearer tokens. Bearer tokens today are the rule when people are using auth. There are definitely people using mutual TLS for service infrastructure, service meshes, for example, do it all over the place. There are other alternatives, and I'll go a little bit into those details. Like I said before, this is very early days for the draft, and but in particular, we don't have any implementations, and we're sort of assuming SPIFFE or something like SPIFFE for the initial authentication of the workloads. However, SPIFFE as is doesn't even provide today what we need. So if you're using a certificate, it more or less is compatible with what we're proposing in the draft. But if you prefer Jose tokens, JOTs, then what you get from SPIFFE is just not enough. Mike, go first.
Yep. So what's a bearer token, please?
A bearer token is basically anything like a password or a signed JSON token that I can send on the wire, and that is not cryptographically tied to anything else, and therefore it can be reused by someone else. If someone steals it, they can use it.
I'm with you. Thank you very much indeed. If I'd heard the term, I'd forgotten it. It was probably a good number of years ago. Thank you.
Greg. Okay. I think I mentioned most of this. So it's a single hop protocol. It's right now we're assuming we're living within a single trust domain. So for example, you can have a single identity server for everybody, and you can have a single PDP for everybody. As I said, we're focusing on REST APIs. Very strictly for now. And in the next slide, we will see that we're proposing either the use of mutual TLS or a token-based solution. And these are the options. So we realized that we will need long-term to support both a mutual TLS-based solution as well as a token-based solution. And it goes like this. In a mutual TLS solution, workload A talks to workload B over a mutually authenticated TLS channel, where each of them has its own certificate, and the certificate contains the full identification of the workload, including, for example, its SPIFFE identity. In a token-based solution, there's a one-way authenticated TLS, so server authenticated TLS, and we use a public key that's associated with a token to sign some parts of the message. There are now two alternatives, and eventually the working group, the WIMSI working group, will decide which one of them to use, but for now we're moving on with two alternatives. One is related to OAuth DPOP. I forget what the D is, but POP is proof of possession. And the other is based on a recent RFC called HTTP message signatures. But both are equivalent. You use a public key to sign parts of the message, and the differences are in the details, exactly what parts are signed, how do you indicate what is signed, and so on. So mostly syntactic differences. And now, the reason why we're all here, in addition to authenticating the payload with a public key, it is clear that we need to carry additional context, additional security relevant context within or alongside the token. And the charter already makes it clear that platform attestation is something we care about and will be carried as part of this security relevant context. One way of doing it, which I think is reasonable, is to have attestation as part of the credential provisioning process. So the first step that's being performed by both workloads as they get the workload credential. The protocol still doesn't define any strict format for the context information. So this is all still very, very open. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, so reflecting on this, it seems clear to me, and people may disagree, but it seems clear to me that in terms of what we're interested in here, we're interested in the functional parts of the application, or the functionality that is attested, and the workload. That seems to be the thing we care about, and generally we wouldn't care, for instance, about the operating system underneath it, or the UEFI, or the wider TCB, because as soon as you start caring about that, you're broadening your scope of interest. Now, I'm not saying it's interesting. It's not interesting in other cases, but in terms of whimsy, it sounds like it's very much the functionality of the application that you care about. So it sounds to me like there's a good use case, a good case here for at least being able to define the functional piece of the application separately to the other pieces as well. And I was just wondering if you agree with that, and B, if other people on the call agree with that.
So I'm not 100% sure. I think what you're referring to is an application as opposed to the infrastructure layers. And my own mental model is of your typical workload being a microservice, maybe a container, but more or less at that level.
Yeah, sure. So let's say you have a microservices, which is a container. You probably don't care about let's say CRI-O, right, which would be the execution layer, and you probably don't care about the pod as well, right? You really care about the application instance, the container instance. That is the unit of workload that you care about. Now, I'm not saying that you don't. There may not be other layers and other use cases for wanting to be able to attest those, but in terms of what you think of as a workload, it's the functional piece. Yes. I see Greg's got his hand up as well. Thanks, that's helpful, Yaron.
Yes, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. I just as a side, Mike, I think my mental model matches yours, and I suspect there's folks want to know what's the identity of what we just called the app, and they also want some assurance that the environment that it's running in is trusted.
I want to be able to talk about all those different types of things, but we need to define what that means. Is it the application workload, is the infrastructure, and we can't do that at the moment, so we need to be able to split that up. But knowing what Whimsy cares about is really helpful as we go along, as we start thinking about definitions, I think.
Yeah. So, question for you, Yaron. Here it says, including but not limited to user identity, platform attestation, as well as artifacts. So platform attestation may be included in context, which is, I'm assuming, gets included in the token that's presented from one workload to another. And whether it is or isn't, the question I'm asking is, or want to ask is the Whimsy working group looking towards standardizing the schema for presenting the platform attestation evidence, or is it looking towards defining the schema for, the bucket that can then hold the evidence, whatever the format is? So they're two. The second one is far simpler, right? The first one is harder, but then makes things easier downstream for folks to like understand platform attestation without having to understand, oh, was this SGX, format of quotes, or is this, set S&P reports, or is this, something related to some sort of secure confidential container environment and what have you.
If I may, there is a practical engineering reason to integrate with Whimsy and actually perhaps make some statements around what attestation should do. I've been saying for a long time that attestation is more like a security token service. And the reason is if you have to make one round trip to the attestation service to effectively validate your measurements and then make another round trip to another service to take these measurements, assign measurements perhaps, and translate them to a set of claims about the workload, well, all of a sudden you're adding a lot of latency and a lot of additional fragility into your flow. And ideally, what you ought to do is the attestation service becomes the place where you send your measurements. It executes perhaps a complex set of policies. And what it gives you is a token that is abstracted from things like, oh, it says GX, oh, it has this firmware, or it has these, things. All of that needs to be processed and forgotten by the time it gets to the relying party. I would argue that, absent federation, the next hop after attestation is your relying party, and it should be given information in a way that's extra stable over time and is in forms of claims, not these fluid measurements.
To go back to Greg's question, honestly, we haven't discussed it yet, but knowing the ITF and specifically some of the work going on in the RATS working group, I would expect us to standardize the bucket and keep attestation information as an opaque blob being carried back and forth.
Thanks, Aaron. That's what I suspected the answer would be, and I think whether my gut sense is at some point in time the community is going to have to do some sort of standardization or some sort of they're standardizing. They're going to have to create some way of looking at all these different attestation evidence types in a way that's consistent across all of them, whether that's the longest term one, which may never happen, is they all converge to a common format. A probably more reasonable goal at some point is there's some translation layers that can make all or most of them look somewhat similar for some concepts that overlap them all. And I'm kind of waiting to kind of see where in the community some energy in that area starts to build some momentum. And that's what's behind the question. Thank you.
So Thomas has his hand up, and I'm sure he has some strong opinions about these issues.
Not very strong, but just pointing out that the RAS working group is standardizing that kind of bucket, and it's called CMW, Conceptual Message Wrappers. That's the thing that you might want to just reuse as is. And regarding Mark's point in terms of normalizing the attestation evidence and making sure that relying parties don't have to know about all the attesters in the world, RATS is also doing works in that area, and the standard is R4C for that. So you might want to take those things and just plug them into the Whimsy placeholders that you can define.
Yep.
So, Thomas, firstly, I'd love to see the work on that presented to this forum kind of soon. That would be really useful. Secondly, I wanted to reflect on Mark's comments about having a single blob. That would be lovely, but I don't think it's plausible for two reasons. Firstly, I think that a single attestation result, verification, validation, whatever you think, it may want to be used by multiple parties, even without federation. You may have the consumer at application level. You may have a consumer at an infrastructure layer, for instance, as well. But also the usages may change over time. You may want to keep it for auditing for later on, and therefore being able to wrap lots of bits in it and then decide which ones you want to use at a particular time, rather than having a single yes, no, I think is important. And from what I understood you saying, Thomas, that level of granularity probably is something that's being thought about, and I think that's really important that we embrace it.
Agree. Some preference for you.
Sorry, is that a question for me? Oh, and you've just put a link in it. Okay, I need to watch that then. Thank you. This isn't recorded, is it? I need to look at it then. Okay, thank you.
And this wraps it for me. Any other questions?
So many.
I have a kind of a question. I don't know if I didn't raise my
I
hand.
haven't been following chat, so if there's anything there for me.
Ned, why don't you go first, and I'll ask a question.
Okay, it was about identity and data. So typically, you think of attestation of the program. In a workload, the difference between the data and the program maybe is less separated or separable, and I'm just wondering if somehow workload data sort of fits into the identity equation somehow.
Are we talking data that's loaded before runtime, post runtime, or what? Because it depends when you're doing the attestation partly, right?
Yeah. So if you take the perspective of, say, content being your workload, and you want to keep track of the content and modifications to the content, then you might want to identify the content appropriately. And so if you think of content protection as a use case, you're part of, there's some functional components to the content which say that it can or can't be modified or viewed or whatever. And so the line between the content and the function can be blurred quite a bit. And so I'm just wondering if that's out of scope for what Whimsy considers to be a workload.
I don't have a clear answer to that, but I don't think it is within scope for Whimsy as it stands today.
Okay.
Greg?
Yeah, I got two things. One is relative to the last point. The question in my mind is, how does this relate to like a multi-tenant application? And then one could view, I think, a multi-tenant application as the same app with different data. Multi-tenant apps, those are, typically cloud services are multi-tenant workloads, right? And so I think, and typically what distinguishes the tenant is data that's fed into the app. So I haven't really thought much about it, but I suspect that question that just came up is, at least from my perspective, would be very important, because I think it's probably fundamental to how multi-tenant workloads essentially are dealt with.
It is for sure, and the way it is handled today, and I think this is like a fine solution, is that user identity or tenant identity is carried as context. Again, how it is exactly protected is still TBD, but there's at least in the charter and the protocol, well, in the charter, there's a placeholder for such context, and we'll specifically user information as part of that context.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The other question I had was I pasted a diagram in chat, and it's a copy. It's a copy of a diagram that I found in the Whimsy architecture document as it stood last week. That's when I read through it. And in the upper left-hand corner of that diagram, the name is called server, and within it is a block that says attestation. And if you read through the doc, the input to it is at least as I read it, the input is attestation evidence, and the output is, the identity token, as you were just, I think, discussing in today's discussion. And so back to Mark's question, it's like today, these two things are done by two different services. There's an identity service like Azure Active Directory issuing identity tokens, and there's a remote verification service or attestation service like IT at Intel or Verizon or MEA at Microsoft that issue tokens for based on attestation evidence. So to me, it's not clear that there's some circumstances where having them together makes sense, having them separate makes sense. I think Mark presented some reasons why, in some circumstances, it would make sense to put them together. Mike, I didn't understand your response as to why you thought it made sense they were separate. I'm sure it does make sense, but
I'm not saying they necessarily need to be separate, but we need all of the information there, even if it's not in separate pieces.
Oh, you mean all of it? You need everything required to do an audit. So I think at least I'm interpreting this as when we talk about tokens being issued by an attestation service, one of the scenarios in our head is this provide for future auditability of the computations that were done to establish these verification results. And that's not typically, I think, something that's thought about when one is thinking about identity tokens. And so in my head, I'm interpreting this as if we glom the two together here, we also have to be thinking about the scenario where the identity token or the Whimsy token is used for auditing reasons in the future, including the auditing of how the verification was done for the attestation evidence. Is that accurate or off base?
That's certainly part of it, yes.
Okay. If it's a large part, then I understand you. If it's a tiny part, then I guess I'm still not.
It's a large part. In terms of time, that was part of my argument. In terms of different parties, that it's a separate argument, but that is part of what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Okay.
And Greg, I honestly cannot answer your question. I'm still well, I haven't seen this diagram before, and I'm personally confused by it.
So, I read the Whimsy architecture spec last week. That's what I can't guarantee it's there today. It was there last week. I promise. At least maybe I had DNS hijacking and sent me somewhere else, but that's what I saw last week.
Yeah, so one of the co-authors I'll be meeting with tomorrow, so I will have a word with him.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool, thank you.
All right, thank you, folks.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, Yaron. That was a very enlightening and interesting discussion. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing, what you've been involved with there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that is it for our agenda for this week. Is there any other topics anybody wants to bring up? We have 12 minutes.
Well, maybe just kind of cycling back to
That's true.
The need for the definition of a workload. I wonder if we could do something kind of progressive in the sort of JPEG sense of the word, of like if we could have a high level definition, kind of like what Yaron showed that came out of Whimsy, as maybe kind of a first order publicly understandable definition, and then get into lower and lower levels of definition. I wonder if that might satisfy some of the needs that Mike saw.
So I'm happy to propose a starting point, which is a TEE workload is all of the memory pages included within a trusted execution environment.
Okay, so I definitely don't want to get into debating what it is, but if we
want to start in definition, that gives us a starting point, and it also means that we can separate it from, for instance, what Mark was talking about, where you're spanning different TEs, because then we can talk about different, about distributed workloads or federated workloads or whatever we want, or component workloads. And I think it's a really important thing to be able to say. So that's a starting point, and then we can start breaking it down beyond that. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of nip off going into the words that you said, but that structure is fine to me, to start with something that's a starting point, and then move from there if that works for other people.
So I'm going to put in the meeting minutes a posited definition. Right. Which we can just so we've got a starting point, right? And if people don't like it, that's great.
Okay, and then maybe that starting point can eventually, in short term, live in the I can't remember what we called the repo, but there was terminology that was defined outside of the terminology paper. Glossary.
It's. I think the problem with the glossary is that is being looked at by, I think, some people with more outreach hats on as agreed definitions, and I think a lot of the stuff there is a long way off that. So we just need to be a bit careful about how that is how that's considered.
Okay.
Sorry, not trying to be awkward here. This is really important and really interesting stuff. And we just need to get it right, because as we know, there are dependencies, internal and external, all over the place. So let's do it.
Dan, are we wrapped up on that topic, or do you have more you want to cover?
No, that's good for me.
Okay. Any other topics? Okay, it looks like we are done with today's content. Housekeeping for chairs. Do we have a volunteer to chair the meeting in 2 weeks? I see Jim on. I see Thomas on. I don't see Keith at the moment.
I think it's my time then. I will take it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Thomas.
You're Bigfoot.
All right, I'll have a good couple of weeks. Chat with you again in a couple of weeks.
Cheers. Thank you.
Folks.
Bye, Yaron.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Yaron.
Yeah, thanks, Yaron. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.